Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we are going to explore the nature of trance. With me is Adam Crabtree, who is a psychotherapist and a trainer of psychotherapists based in Toronto, Ontario, Canada. He is the author of From Mesmer to Freud, Magnetic Sleep and the Roots of Psychological Healing. He is also the author of Evolutionary Love and the Ravages of Greed, as well as Memoirs of a Trance Therapist. Welcome, Adam.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to be with you once again. And I have to think that trance is one of the main themes of your whole career. As I look at your writings, I didn't even mention your book, Trance Zero, which is breaking the spell of conformity.
Yes.
Another important book about the nature of trance. It's something that's fascinated you throughout your professional career.
Well, it really has. When I was in psychotherapy myself, my therapist used hypnosis with me. So I became familiar with it from that side, and in the whole time that I've practiced as a psychotherapist, I've always used hypnosis, and I've come to look upon it as one particular kind of trance. Trance is the broader word, it's the older word, and it's the one I've come to prefer, actually.
It's a word that's often used in many other contexts.
Yes, it is.
I mean, we talk about being entranced by a beautiful woman,
yes,
or entranced by theatrical production.
That's right. It's used in many contexts, and it also is often used in connection with unusual experiences of consciousness. And of course, when you're working as a psychotherapist, that's a big part of its use in psychotherapy, that you're able to tap parts of the psyche that may not be that available otherwise.
So I suppose for just as a first step, we would say a trance state is an altered state of consciousness.
Yes, it is an altered state of consciousness in the sense that Charlie Tart devised the word. And it's a good way to look at it as an altered state of consciousness because that's very general. And I see trance very general in its meaning. The meaning of trance for me is a state of focus on something which brings about a diminished awareness of everything else, which then evokes from the person inner resources to deal with whatever it is that the focus is on. And that is the kind of the essence of how I see trance as in its definition.
Well, let me ask you this. Based on that definition, it strikes me there may be never an occasion when we are not in a trance.
Well, that's the way I look at it. I think that everyday life is made up of moving from trance to trance, and sometimes trance is nestled within trance. It's our life is full of different ways that we focus on something and then move to another focus. And when you are focused on something, you really cut down on peripheral awareness and concentrate on that thing.
It strikes me that in Vedic or Hindu philosophy, when they say all is Maya, everything is an illusion, I suspect maybe what they're trying to get at is that we are always in one form of trance or another.
Maybe they are. I really don't know how to define it, but you know a lot more about that than I do.
Well, it's not really. Adam, I'm speculating.
All right.
I am. Because I can't put myself back there with the ancient Vedic sages very, very well. They may have had something quite different in mind, but I have heard people like Charlie Tart, to whom you referred, and who is a good friend of mine, who has been on this program, seated in that very chair where you are. I think he sometimes uses it that way.
Okay. Well, that makes a certain amount of sense, yes. To me, life is so rich, it's so full of different inputs that we have to be able to limit them at any particular moment in order to deal with it.
Well, okay, fair enough. But then if we're always in a trance, how is the word meaningful to distinguish one trance from another?
Well, that's something that I thought about when I wrote my book, Trance Zero. This was a problem that I was up against. The other problem was the definition of trance, which I can get to a little bit later.
Yeah.
I mean, the implications of the definition. But yes, how are we going to talk about trance if it's everywhere and it's a part of life all the time? Does that remove any sense of meaning? Does it become meaningless if we make it so universal? I don't think we do, because the definition of it is very specific. So it has a real meaning. But I found it used to distinguish between different kinds of trances, to help our thinking about it, and to sort of describe how it does it is with us in everyday life. So the four different kinds of trances that I decided to use in discussing trance is, first of all, a situational trance, where what we're focused on is a situation where we're doing something, a project, an undertaking of some kind of action, and what we have diminished awareness of is anything else, anything outside of that project or that action.
So, typically, like going to a movie.
Going to a movie, that's a very good example, by the way, because we certainly go into pretty deep trance in movies sometimes. Going to a movie, also like dancing and acting, building a cabinet. We have to focus there too. So all of these things involve projects and doing, and I call those situational trances. The second kind of trance that I speak about is interpersonal trance, where what we're focused on is another person and our relationship with that person and the communications and interactions that are happening within that relationship with that person. I call that interpersonal trance. The third kind of trance is an inner mind trance. An inner mind trance means focusing on our inner world, the world of inner impressions, of memories, of symbols, of dreams, anything that impresses us inside and that we have a kind of emotional, mental experience of on the inside.
Like daydreaming might be a good example.
Daydreaming would be a very good example. And night dreaming is the deepest inner mind trance we can have. Meditation is a kind of inner mind trance. And hypnosis is too, and I'll be talking about that in a moment, how that's a special kind of inner mind trance. The fourth kind of trance is group mind trance, where what we're focused on is the thinking and feeling and attitude of a group that we are engaged in at the moment. This can be a group like a family group. It can be, let's say, a church gathering. It also can be such a thing as a soccer game, where you're very much focused on a group feeling. And also there are unfortunate instances of this, like crowds and mobs that do harm.
The madness of the crowd.
The madness of the crowd, exactly. So group mind trance. And for me, the broadest group mind trance is the cultural trance, where that's a group mind trance for a whole culture, a whole people.
Well, I recall attending the American Anthropological Association meetings in San Francisco. I think it was back in 1975 when Charles Muzes presented a paper there suggesting that hypnotic trance was the basis of all acculturation. That's how we learn language. That's how we understand who our parents are and what they expect of us and the values of our society. It's all learned according to Muzes through he was quite specific. It's very much akin to hypnosis.
Yes, and Charlie Tart talks about this too in his book Waking Up, I think it is. The trance of a whole culture. And he talked about being indoctrinated into this trance from birth.
Yeah.
Maybe from before birth, but at least from birth we're indoctrinated in, and we learn it very well. And so we don't even realize we're in a trance. We don't realize that our view of the world is really very narrow when you think of other possible cultural views that there are.
And it strikes me that this becomes very evident when you encounter an individual who clings to a certain idea with enormous certainty, and it's an illogical idea, and you can try and point out the illogic of it, but it makes no difference. They're immovable.
Yes, that's right. We are involved in various ways of sort of making the world understandable, but very often in the process we have to reduce it to less than it is. And in order to, and we stay with that because it feels familiar and it feels safe way of looking at things.
I know social psychologists have pointed out one of the strongest findings of social psychology is that when somebody clings to an ideology or a theory, all the facts that they see seem to fit that theory.
Yes.
And somehow they manage to ignore all facts that can be right under their nose that are contrary to the theory.
That's right. This happens everywhere. It happens obviously in culture. It happens in politics. And it happens in universities. It happens in philosophy. Yep. These are all places that illustrate precisely the thing you're talking about.
Well, you referred to Charlie Tart's book, Waking Up.
Yes.
And that suggests at least the possibility that there is a state of consciousness that is not a trance state.
Yes, well, there are two aspects of that. One is, I think we always are trying to expand our awareness and to step back and not be so narrow in the way you were talking about, so that we realize there are more cultural ways of seeing the world than the one that I was born in. But then there's also a more, you might say, a more metaphysical way of approaching that, and thinking it as thinking of ourselves as having a part of ourselves that's able to step back from everything, from all of our trances. Almost like I suppose some would call it a kind of witness self that gets the broadest possible view and can relate all of our trances to each other from that kind of perspective.
Well, and I suppose even then there are more and more subtle levels. The great illusion may be to think that you actually have awakened.
Yes, that's true. Yes, I don't know that you could ever completely awaken.
Well, this is a fascinating topic, and now you were going to address the implications of your definition.
Yes, that's right. The problem was in 1993 or 1997 when I published Trance Zero. I tried to figure out how to define trance, and I came up with the definition we've been talking about. But the thing is that hypnosis was, of course, the word that was mainly being used and is mainly being used to describe trance states. When people write about it, the way I was talking about it, that's too narrow. It's much broader than just hypnosis, because hypnosis is something people think of as using in psychotherapy, stage hypnotism, and so forth, special instances of it. And also, hypnosis is the word that has been used to study experimentally people in those particular kinds of altered states.
Right.
And I saw there, as I was trying to figure out how to talk about it, a problem, because there was no generally agreed upon definition of hypnosis. Many different definitions, but no one even claimed to have the final definition of what it was.
Well, I suppose that's due to the fact that if hypnosis or trance is a state of consciousness, my state of consciousness is not observable to anybody but me.
That's true. That's true. So if you're going to define hypnosis, you have to make it such a broad definition that it can fit everyone.
Yeah.
Now, when I was trying to see how hypnosis had been defined, I realized that over the ages, over the 200 years or more, since animal magnetism and magnetic sleep was discovered.
Franz Mesmer.
That's right. And then hypnosis was labeled, the label was used a few decades later, that over that period of time, hundreds of phenomena had been associated with these states.
Very unusual phenomenon.
That's right. Many of them were unusual. We would call some of them certainly paranormal, others more everyday, or others would be just unusual since they don't happen very often. But many, many different kinds of, of phenomena were discussed over that period of time. And what had happened is that those who were trying to experiment and understand hypnosis from an experimental and objective point of view were in using a definition of hypnosis, had arrived at the solution of saying certain phenomena will be the defining phenomena for hypnosis.
Yeah.
And if we're going to study it, then if those phenomena are present, then we have hypnosis. And if those phenomena are not present, we can't say we have hypnosis.
And they also talk about the stages or the depth of the trance.
That's right. That's right. They would talk about stages and depth, and there were various ways of defining if a person was in trance, and there were ways of defining how to go into a trance, what the induction should be. I found that very unsatisfying because a list of phenomena can't be a definition of of anything. And one of the problems is that those lists were chosen by experimenters in a very arbitrary way. Of the hundreds of phenomena, maybe a half a dozen or at the most 10 were chosen as those which would be a sign of the real presence of hypnosis. But they didn't have to be the same 10 or the same 5. It could vary. So it seems like a very slippery concept here. So what I wanted to do was to define it. And so I used trance, as I've been talking about it here, and saw hypnosis as one species of inner mind trance. The trance where we go inside and become aware of the inner world. Hypnosis being one species of that, being defined by me as an inner mind trance with rapport. That is, it differs from meditation, for instance, which is an inner mind trance, but there is no rapport with another person. With hypnosis,
so
there's
it's
a rapport.
both inner mind and interpersonal.
Yes. That's right. It's interpersonal also. So it involves someone that we have this connection with, a person who is either inducing it in us or inducing it and guiding us through some process, whatever it may be, like in psychotherapy. So that was my trance, that was my definition of hypnosis. And that's a very definite definition. Doesn't depend on any lists, doesn't depend on any particular phenomenon. It just depends upon being able to identify the person as being in the inner world, focused there, and with a diminished awareness of everything else. Now, that definition is one of the reasons that I decided that something had to be done about a new definition was something that had been written by one of the main hypnotizing, or I should say hypnotic experimenters, whose name was Andre Weizenhofer. And he wrote in around the year 2000, he said that hypnosis, the field of hypnosis, is an increasing state of chaos. It's becoming more and more chaotic, and later on he says the reason for that, he tells us why he would say that. He says, we don't know what hypnosis is. And he came to that conclusion when he was trying to explain to people what kind of an induction they should use. How do you induce hypnosis? He said, well, we don't know what it is, so you can't define what would be a definitely effective induction. What you should use is just those that have been shown to work.
Well, it sounds to me like what Weizenhofer was saying is not so much that hypnosis itself is chaotic, but that the study of hypnosis.
That's exactly what he said. He was saying the field is chaotic. And as I read this, I thought he was sort of upset by this, and he didn't see any answer for this. And I thought that precisely what was needed was a definition, and which I came up with.
Of course, the whole field of consciousness studies suffers from a certain amount of chaos as well.
Yes, that's true. Chaos is, I suppose, just part of the human condition as we studied the psyche. You have to, because you never can contain it, because you never can bring it down to a final framework or analysis, there has to be a certain amount of chaos there. But the chaos in the field of hypnosis, in my opinion, had not been recognized. People were satisfied with lists, which can't be satisfactory for experimental work. And I thought that needed to be corrected.
Well, I would think the interesting thing about the study of hypnosis and trance states is how far can you push it? Can you use the hypnotic trance to set new records, for example, in track and field? Because records are being set every year. There are new records. Why? I'm pretty sure lots of sports psychologists do exactly that.
Well, absolutely. And there you're touching upon that aspect of the definition of trance, which is it evokes resources needed to deal with whatever it is you're you're focusing on. So if you take athletes, what they're focusing on is better and better athletic performance. And if they go into a trance, it invokes whatever resources they may have that are needed for that, and it helps to enhance those resources if you can do this in a very concentrated, focused way. So it is very useful for athletes.
And, I'm thinking of religious practices when people pray, when they chant and engage in various religious rituals. That also engenders a trance state.
It does. Prayer, meditation, concentration on ideals, thinking about the moral life, these all bring about trance states for us. That's right.
And there's a certain danger to that. When I was a graduate student in criminology, one of my professors was Dr. Bernard Diamond, who was a psychiatrist and who hypnotized Sirhan after the murder of Robert Kennedy. And he concluded that Sirhan had put himself into a trance, and that's what enabled him to commit an act of murder.
Well, that makes sense to me.
Yeah.
He would have to be, if he was going to carry this out, he would have to go into a state where he was focused and could proceed in a logical way towards the goal that he had in mind.
Yeah. And then, of course, we have the movie, The Manchurian Candidate.
Yes.
Another example of the potential negative implications of trance. And
trance can be used in any way, negative or positive. In itself, it just refers to a particular kind of state, but the use of it is determined by the individual or the group.
I can say that throughout my life, ever since I was in high school, I learned how to put myself into a hypnotic trance state and use it to take exams and for general health and relaxation. And looking back now over more than half a century, I would say it served me very well.
Yes. I'm just curious to know, how did you find out about it? I mean, how did you know to do that?
Well, in my case, I had a cousin, Stuart Cohn, may he rest in peace, and who was an amateur magician. And he learned it somehow in the course of his amateur magical practice.
Right, and studying stage hypnosis, perhaps, from magicians who would use it.
Yeah. Mentalists, I mean, it's quite amazing the things that mentalists will do on stage.
Yes, that's right. So that's the way you learned it. Okay.
Yeah, I consider myself fortunate.
Yes.
In that regard, to have discovered such a powerful tool at such a young age.
Absolutely. And one thing that reminds me of is I'm a psychotherapist, and I teach people to use hypnosis or trance states in therapy, because I use it all the time, and I think it's a very, very powerful thing to use. What I'm surprised about is so few people in the field use it, because I've found it so incredibly powerful in uncovering things, in helping people to find their strength, in developing towards goals they want to reach. And it, in my opinion, is quite neglected in the psychotherapeutic field.
Well, I think you're right. As I recall, it wasn't until 1954, nearly 200 years after Mesmer, before the American Medical Association recognized hypnosis as a legitimate practice within medicine.
Well, that very recent because it's been around for a long, long time.
Yeah. And even Freud, who learned hypnosis in his early practice, discarded it.
Yes.
And I imagine that had a lot to do with the attitude of therapists who often followed Freud.
Without doubt. His decision not to use it, I'm sure, influenced the whole tradition after him in psychoanalysis.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And I guess that there was a certain amount of concern that people who practice hypnosis had an uncanny power like Svengali or Rasputin. It made people a little afraid.
Yeah, and those are just myths. That's not the way hypnosis or trance states are at all. Mm-hmm. But those kinds of things have been projected on it because it's been mysterious to people. And we project onto mysterious things all of our, let's say, fears, and will that way distort what that thing may be.
No. But nevertheless, there must be thousands of hypnosis practitioners.
Oh, yes, I'm sure that there are many thousands of them. Actually, many people today are being trained to use hypnosis, not so much in psychotherapy, but in little projects like giving up smoking, losing weight. It's also being used as a part of past life exploration, that sort of thing. Many people are being trained to do that. For me, that is just a very small part of the power of hypnosis. And I like to train people to use it for the deepest things that the person can explore.
You know, to me, one of the most profound uses of the trance state is to help condition oneself in terms of self-esteem.
Yes.
And
yes.
I would go even further and to say self-love
yes.
for oneself. So often we get into bad habits of in which we in effect attack ourselves.
Yes.
And through the use of hypnotic trance, we can correct that habit.
Yes, this is very true. I agree with that. One of the things that hypnosis does is it puts you in touch with your inner resources, and that increases your self-esteem. Now that leads towards the subject of human potential development and human potential movements. And where I believe hypnosis or trance states have been sort of instinctively chosen as an essential part of developing human potentials. Whether that human potential movement was back with Puisiger in the very beginning of all this, or in the 60s, when there was an opening up of awareness of and interest in human potentials, and a realization that those potentials were far beyond what perhaps had been thought. So what I have seen in the study of those times and right up to now is that most of the techniques used in human potential seminars, groups, exploratory projects of various kinds involve trances in a central way.
Yeah, I mean, we hear the term, for example, guided meditation.
Yes, yes.
That would be like a trance state.
Very definitely it's a trance state.
But there's a difference, I guess, between doing something like that where you're setting your intention to do something positive for yourself, as opposed to sitting down in front of the television and watching the news every night at 6 o'clock and getting entranced by all of the horrible things that are going on in the world.
Yes, that is true. I mean, certainly those are trances. We go into trances when we watch television without any question. And it can become an addiction because a trance can become, a repeated trance can become an addiction. And it can, in that case, be an addiction that actually interferes with one's mood and with feelings about life and so forth. Yes.
So I guess the lesson in all of this is that we do have the opportunity and the ability to choose, to some extent at least, which kind of a trance we're going to be in.
We do. We are free human beings, and we have the ability to use that freedom to make choices about which trances we will go into. We are going to go into trances willy-nilly, but we can choose which they will be to some extent. I've actually come to see emotional illnesses or emotional disturbances as trance clusters, where we're in a certain set of trances that keep coming and repeating themselves over and over again, and we can't see beyond that cluster. And so we're very narrowed into them, and particularly when that involves such things as a lack of good feeling about oneself, or what involves fears or uncontrollable emotions, that's the very nature of emotional disturbances.
Well, if I'm caught up in an emotional disturbance like that, I suppose one way to break through is just maybe to take a deep breath or something to kind of shift your attention.
Well, yes, that can help. But for many people, those clusters are so coherent that once they take hold, it's very hard to break out of them. And here's where therapeutic work can help them. But they might also develop a specific technique for themselves. It does break through for them. But for many, it's really difficult, though. They're caught in those clusters.
Well, some problems are much more severe than others.
Yes, that's right.
And surely psychotherapy, I think, is something that everybody can and ought to benefit from. In a way, it's a shame that it's become sort of captured by the medical model and the insurance companies. And
yes, that is a shame, because it reduces human beings to more things than persons. I think that psychotherapy should be the great advocate for human beings as rich, deep, and sacred persons, and to respect that and to help people free themselves from whatever it is that's causing them not to be what they can be.
Well, Adam Crabtree, once again, what an enlightening discussion. Thank you for being with me.
You're certainly welcome. I've enjoyed it very much.
And thank you for being with us.